for years I've said that, the soft skills are much more important than the hard skills. Most people can be taught almost anything, especially if you give them a turnkey, you give them direction, and you have decent management. But the soft skills, man, the work ethic and the cultural fit and, those types of things. And again, there's a million examples, things like, for example, people's ability to compartmentalize, work life versus personal life and not bring drama into the office. I mean, so many different things, right, that make for a good team member.
Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and today I have a treat. I don't get it that often, but when I have somebody, a law firm owner, to interview on the podcast, but more importantly, somebody that I work closely with. Our guest today is Adam Rosenblum, principal of Rosenblum Law, and we work together. Our business does fractional CFO services for his law firm. So we've been working together for a while, and I really, really love what he's built, the team that he's built, and I'm excited to jump in and have a conversation around what it took to get there, and some of the lessons learned along the way. I think this is going to be really impactful for your listeners, so make sure that you stay tuned in for this. Before we jump into the conversation, real quick, we're currently running a 2-day in-person workshop called $100,000 a month workshop. If you're looking to grow beyond yourself, you're looking to get to $100,000 a month in revenue for your practice in 2026, and you've been struggling to do that. You've been trying to figure out how to make that happen, and you just haven't been able to get there. Our next event is coming up soon. You want to go to profitwithlaw.com/LFG 2026, profitwithlaw.com/LFG 2026. The room is small. We're keeping it to 20 seats. You're going to be able to walk away with your plan for 2026, your action plan, exactly how to make this happen, and do it in 12 months, not in the 5 to 10 years that you've probably been trying to make that happen with so far anyway. So Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Moshe. I appreciate that.
No problem. So real quick,
I was going to ask you what LFG stands for, but
law firm growth.
There you go.
Law firm growth. I usually spell it out because I'm not sure if they heard F or S or, like sometimes you hear the wrong letter. So thank you for clarifying that. Let's just take a step back. Stepping into legal in general, like how did you decide to become an attorney and then to start your own firm? Those are different decisions along the way. Talk to me about your journey on how that happened and why you took that journey.
Okay, well, I'll make a long story short. I'm a second generation attorney. My dad, Sandy, also started his own firm more than 60 years ago. And I grew up among lawyers and judges, being very comfortable in this profession. And it was always assumed, not just by my family, but also by teachers. They said, "Wow, you're going to be a lawyer." Like this was sort of the path that was predetermined for me. Being a rebellious teenager, as we all are at a certain point, I said, well, no, I'm not going to do what everybody says that it is that I'm going to do. And in fact, my older sister, who's also an attorney, a retired attorney, and as they say, recovering attorney herself, she probably sought to influence me a little bit. In that regard, she says, why don't you take some other types of courses that might interest you, like psychology, for example? And I said, oh, okay, that might be interesting. Let me take some psychology courses. And I did, and I fell in love with it. And so I ended up going down that path, actually applying to doctoral programs in clinical psychology until I discovered that there was one program that's a law psychology program, a joint JD PsyD 6-year program. And I was like, okay, perfect. Now I can do both. And at that point in my life, I already was a very young spouse, young father, and my dad sat me down and he's like, listen, I get what you're trying to do. This sounds like an awesome thing, but it seems quite impractical based on your stage in life. Why don't you just apply to law school and see what happens? And luckily, I got a good enough scholarship that it kind of pushed me in that direction. And so I ended up really on the path I suppose was predetermined for myself. But it's really funny. Sometimes I'll reflect back on that path and what I was planning to do and what I could have done, what I could have been, having been accepted to all those programs in clinical psychology, and really had to wonder whether I would be in a same or similar position as I am today. And I think the answer is probably yes. I think I probably would have tired of the day-to-day clinical practice of psychology, as I have sort of tired from the day-to-day slog of the practice of law, and I probably would have become an entrepreneur like I am today. So I would have been running a very different type of business, I'm sure. And, the background in psychology definitely comes into play every single day. Not necessarily the learnings, because, at the undergraduate level, you don't learn that much, practically speaking, but certainly the fascination with human psychology has led me to grow my own knowledge in, for example, sales and marketing aspects of psychology. And those are elements which I'm involved in, not even necessarily because I have to be, but because I want to be. I'm really interested in those aspects of running the business. So, that's kind of what happened. To answer your second question, during law school, I did work for a big firm, a very well-known firm, for 2 years, and I was slated to be hired. At least that's what I believed right out of school. And in the end, I wasn't. The offer didn't come, and I was faced with a decision as to whether or not I was going to pursue a different opportunity, or go off on my own. And again, my father stepped in and said, I think you should do this. I did it. I think you should do it. You can do it. And he encouraged me a lot, and helped me get set up, gave me an office, introduced me to colleagues of his. Of course, when you finish law school, or maybe not, of course, maybe people don't know this, you also don't really know much about how to practice law when you finish law school. There's almost nothing practical that you learn in law school other than maybe how to write a brief, or how to interpret case law. So he encouraged me to start my own practice. And much like he did 50 years prior, I started a general practice. And, like most people with a professional license, thought of myself as an attorney. And I'm an attorney, and I'm going to be doing attorney stuff. And it took several years for me to really shift my mindset from, as Gerber would say, from technician to entrepreneur. So that's the short story, Moshe.
Yeah, but so you just teed me up for my first question or round of questioning for you because um I many people spend a long time, I mean more than a few years, till they realize that hey, if I stay in this attorney role, I mean I talked about this 100K per month workshop, right? Like the secret sauce of that is hire an attorney, right? Like that's,
Yes,
people are coming into that room and most of them don't have an attorney on staff and they haven't figured out how to navigate from there to having an attorney on staff. And usually it's because they're operating from the present, which, right now I can't justify the salary of an attorney. And I get, there is, when you step into the business owner frame of mind, you start to make decisions based on investing in the future and and you need to, there's some risk that needs to be taken. um what was the period of time that it took, and was there an impetus or a driving factor that made you realize like, oh, this is actually not the way to go, like I don't want to stay here and I have something bigger that I'm trying to do.
definitely. So when I was up in Albany, which is where I grew up, where I went to law school, I practiced, beside my father for the first 5 years before we moved to New Jersey for one reason only, which was to provide our children better Jewish educational opportunities. I was definitely in the old mindset. I did hire people. I had some assistants and college students that were helping me part-time. So I still sort of got it. I understood that I have to go beyond myself, and I knew that I didn't want to be a solo forever. But I had to reestablish myself here in Jersey, and that took some time to build up, again, starting from scratch, which was no small feat. And I had a colleague at the time who was a friend, and we used to talk about our common struggles and things. And he said, there's this book called The E-Myth, and this guy, Michael Gerber, and he says, you should really read this book. And, I approached it with, I guess, some healthy skepticism. I said, well, you know what? How can a book change your life? And
Right.
I think it really did. I think reading that book after having been in practice for about 8 years, and as he puts it, doing it and doing it. You go in and like you're doing the stuff of law, and because that's what you're told is what you're supposed to do. And of course, a lawyer has clients, and clients are primary, right? Not the business. That's sort of the psychology that most people are in this big, big picture called that I refer to as founder's dilemma. And reading that book really like gave me a big push. The two hallmarks are systemization and delegation, of his approach. And it really gave me a big push to start realizing that I needed to work, as he says, on the business, not in the business. And believe it or not, my first full-time hire was not an attorney, was not a paralegal, it was actually a marketing person. And that really changed everything. And again, that's another long story as to how I ended up there. I started with an agency. I learned an expensive lesson, although it was one of the biggest, most valuable lessons of my life, that it made more sense for me in particular to have somebody working more closely with myself who was all in on developing our business as opposed to the agency model. Again, I'm not criticizing all agencies per se, but and to me, like that was really when things started to take off, when I realized that okay, you can't do everything. And one of the things that, is the thing is you need to have gas in the tank for the car to go. So I better figure out this marketing thing. And this was right in the earlier years of SEO. And everybody was being told by everybody in the industry, you have to have a website and you have to have SEO. Like people knew about the website, but this concept of needing to be visible and how you get your website to be visible was really starting to really ramp up. So I got on that train right as it was really pulling out of the station. And not that it happened overnight. I mean, it took I would say a solid 3 to 5 years until we really, really dug in deep and started seeing significant returns on those investments. But we built it up to the point where we were getting 80% of our leads. And just to frame this up for you in terms of our primary or almost sole practice area at the time, which was traffic violations, in 2019, we handled just over 7,000 cases at around a 50% conversion rate. We were running a lead volume of around 15,000 leads, 80% of which were coming organically right off the web from Google straight to our website. We were buying ads, but we didn't really need to rely on that. So that was, a major step in this journey.
There's two things that you shared that are really intriguing to me, and that I want to dive into, and I'm going to throw them both out, and because I don't know which is more important, and I don't want to forget them, so I'll just throw them both out there, and hopefully we'll talk about both of them. One is you shared that you hired a marketing person first. That was like the big hire or the stepping stone for you in the growth of your business, and um, and I'm curious about that experience because typically, and this is the way I guide, solos who are trying to grow beyond themselves, is that they need to increase their capacity before they try to fill the capacity. Because if you solve the marketing problem, but you're the bottleneck, then you just have all of that waste that's happening while you're scrambling to try to get an attorney in place. Um, so I'm curious about that experience for you and why you felt that that was the right move for in the growth of your business. The second piece is you shared that you most of your business is coming from traffic violations. At some point, you went from a general practitioner to having a niche, right? A specialty, something that became the bread and butter of your operation. And I'm curious about that transition and whether that was intentional or it just happened on its own. And, and how did you know to go through that and what that process looked like?
Sure. So maybe I'll answer the second question first, because as far as like the decision to hire, the marketing person, like I said, to me, it just became obvious that there needs to be fuel for this fire, gas in the tank, whatever the analogies are. I can't do everything. And even if somehow I can achieve this know-how, I can learn the stuff of it, even though I'm not a very technically inclined person, which is also part of the issue, right? I never learned HTML, never learned how to code a website. I realized that it was a necessary thing. So it was either going to be an agency or it was going to be in-house. And that was pretty much it. Um, as to your second question, it's another interesting part of the journey. One of the things that I discovered about myself in the earlier years of my practice, and my father, for the 40 of the 60 years of his practice, has been focusing on personal injury litigation and achieved, great levels of distinction together with his law partners in this regard. And so it was natural for me to try my hand at that. And I found myself really not very interested, first of all, in that area of law to begin with, but I found that litigation was something that was very taxing, both personally and professionally. Doing plaintiff's work, having, a young family with rising expenses, very, very difficult for me to be able to do the work with the promise of getting paid, perhaps not even a promise, also to fund the cases and all the expenses, which is something that was so difficult for me to bear. Of course, I could have attacked it like a business if I was more in that mode and maybe taken loans or something like that with the belief that I'd be able to pay them back. But I'm the type of person that still is less comfortable with debt than maybe many other people. I have a cousin who's in real estate, and we were once having this conversation. He says, "Oh, I love debt. Debt is the whole real estate industry works on debt, right?" But I didn't really want to do that, and so I had to really pivot towards things that were cash flow positive. And what I liked about criminal and traffic is that it was cash flow positive. Same thing with disability. I did Social Security disability for a few years, and I was trying to really, anyways, move towards something that was more systematic, something that lent itself to being, more process oriented, shall we say. Litigation, especially if you're taking more serious cases, it's hard to do that in a systematic way. Every case is very, very unique, and it's like literally the flip side. Now, my father's perspective is, ooh, take these big cases, try to really go deep on them. And for somebody that is more of a lawyer's lawyer, as he is, it was always the greatest, pleasure for him to be able to unlock the challenging aspect of various different cases and go deep on them. And to me, that was not that I'm not intellectual, but to me, it was more again about the business orientation. It's like, well, how can you make a scalable business? Like you can't. He had to have partners that were as qualified or capable as he was intellectually, skills wise, and so on and so forth. Bottom line, in many ways, if you're going to do a very bespoke, customized type of legal work, it's much harder. I'm not going to say impossible. It's much harder for it to be scalable. On the other hand, these other areas of law were more appealing from a cash flow perspective, more easily scalable, more amenable to process. So we started doing things like legal name changes, a limited vein of copyright infringement defense, expungements, minor criminal cases. And so for me, it solved the cash flow problem. And then at the same time, like I said, I was already sort of getting into this headspace of scalability. And for a business like traffic tickets, you need to make it scalable. The only way you can be successful when you're bringing in cases at $500 a pop is by doing it in a volume. So part of what I didn't mention is that what also came along with this was developing technology in order to support these processes. I said there's got to be a better way than doing all this stuff manually. For example, even before DocuSign became de rigueur, we had to have certain waivers and authorizations that had to be signed. I had a software developer create a signature tool that we had as part of our onboarding process, so our clients can upload their ticket, sign, and pay. I call it three steps, right? Very creative name: upload, sign, and pay. But I said there's got to be a technology way to do it, and we found a technology way to do it. And so this is, I think in an era where some lawyers were using CRMs, but it was much less common than it is today. And I said, what, these off-the-shelf ones, they're not customizable enough. We're going to have to find a product that we can customize. And we went several $100,000 deep into customizing this product that we still use to this very day. And that again was also another major key to this, to this volume business that we call traffic tickets that still, produces several $1 million of revenue a year for us today.
Yeah, I love that journey and sharing what you've done to customize the tech stack in order to do what you want, thinking outside the box and now there's a new frontier with AI and people who understand the use case possibility for themselves can really look for the right solution. I think the biggest problem with stuff like that is really just understanding what it can do and being creative enough to understand how it can help your business. But most people see a solution, they're like, oh, this might work for me. Let's, shiny object syndrome, right? And they
Yeah.
implement it. Approaching it from trying to solve a problem is usually a much better way to implement tech in the business stack. Looking at your business journey, is there one or two pivotal moments or times where you did something that you feel like this was something that really affected the ability for me to be where I am at today?
Yeah. So for sure, I would say the first thing was the mindset shift that I engaged in when I went through that period with the E-Myth. And I actually went to a conference specifically to meet Michael Gerber to thank him in person. And he used to say things like, yeah, people tell me all the time I changed their life. He says, no, you changed your life. And he was just being modest. But anyway, that was definitely one pivotal moment. The second pivotal moment was that we saw a tremendous shakeup during the pandemic. Being in a business that was very reliant on driving, as you can imagine, when the world shut down, people weren't driving, cops weren't out issuing tickets, courts were closed down, and it was a real moment. It was kind of like a dash of cold water in all of our faces of, this moment of, hey, maybe you're too heavily leveraged in one area, maybe you're not diversified enough. And then, is this even going to come back, right? And in many ways, it has come back, but not fully. Like the volume that we have and the volume of, of violations that are being issued has actually been on the decline. I think people might be surprised to find, part of that is automated traffic enforcement, i.e., speed cameras and the like. But it definitely was a real wake-up call. And so that was a multi-year journey for us of trying to figure out what other areas might be ripe for us to expand and develop. And of course, the most obvious thing is to look right in your backyard and to try to develop what you already have or what you're already doing. And we were already doing criminal. We always had done some degree of criminal, whether it's DWI, whether it was reckless driving or things that related to, marijuana possession back when that was illegal and things. That was a very common thing, college kids getting busted for unlawful possession of marijuana. So some of those things were quite natural for us to think about pivoting towards working with other lawyers who we had sort of in our network as potential opportunities. But I have to say that there's no question that our work together, and I promise that you did not put me up to this, but our work together, I think, was probably the most pivotal moment, other than that first one that I mentioned in our journey so far, because what we did when you first started with us a year ago was you helped us analyze our business for us to firstly figure out what's profitable, what's not profitable. And, it's not like I didn't know what a P&L was, and it's not like I didn't understand the concept of profit, but helping us get to the points where we looked at the various different business lines and really facilitating these conversations around what are we doing? Is it good for us? Is this model good? Is there a way maybe we can optimize it? Or maybe we should be looking towards something completely different. And what's interesting was, when you came in and we had those meetings, that series of meetings, it's not like estate planning was new to us. In fact, we had been doing it for the past prior couple of years in a very small way. We even had an associate at a time who we had hired to do it, and then he departed. But it wasn't working for us. But the key thing was that you came and you said, well, maybe it's not working in this way, but I know for a fact that it can be working because I have clients and I've seen it work for other people, perhaps doing it slightly different. So let's go on a journey of trying to figure out whether or not there's a way that we can make this work. And then like I said, those conversations around profit, definitely were extremely resonant. It was something that had always been, of course, as the business owner, of primary concern to me. I did have a prior fractional CFO who was helping me in this regard, but it was just it was a different approach. It was this a person was not someone who had the significant experience working with law firms that you do, as an example. So I think that was a massively pivotal moment, and here we are a year later, having started almost from scratch and built up what for us is almost a brand new practice area, from zero to, in our last month we had 47 new hires just in that 1 month alone, which is something that we only could have dreamed of doing, when we started working together last, October, November, whenever it was.
It's interesting because I've had a lot of regret about not putting my foot down and really pushing you harder on it because it took a while until the buy-in was there. But what's incredible about your team and how you've rolled this out is just the level of execution. And I don't think that anybody can just spin up a practice area and get the level of success that you've had if you didn't already have a team in place that was highly talented and able to just kind of move people around and change role assignments and just have everyone step up and do what needed to be done. It's just been it so much so that we meet once a week, and there'll be times that we're going from one meeting to the next, and it's completely changed between those two meetings. And that's kudos to you guys and the stuff that you do. You've got some really good players, and execution is really important. Once you decide you're going to do something, just go and do it and don't hold back. And I think that you've got that your team has done that incredibly well. Um, and really interesting, in the flip side of the pivotal moment in the growth of your business, there's always lessons to be learned in the mistakes. So I'm curious, if you look back on your journey, can you identify one or two times where you feel like, wow, I really made a mistake there, and it taught me a lesson, and you're still carrying that lesson around today?
Yeah, I think that the biggest mistake of the previous iteration was maybe almost the who more than the what. And I think this also ties back into the compliments you issued. I want to thank you for that. I'm extremely proud of the team that we've built and at all in all aspects of the business. I don't want to use the word top down because that's not a nice thing to say, but anybody and everybody here knows and is always told that they have a valuable essential role. And if they weren't essential, they wouldn't be here. We're not looking just to pay people for nothing. And whether it's our newer HR manager, she started about a year ago, has been absolutely incredible in helping us, elevate the hires and helping us streamline the hiring process. Also, by the way, a major game changer for us to have somebody who's really good at that. To our three-person management team, myself and our co-COOs, to our team leads that sit on and have very significant level of responsibility. And so the upside of the who is, yes, that we have been very, very, very blessed. And also choosy, right? There are times where people have been let go because they weren't the right person and the right fit for work ethic, culture, and things of that nature. And for years, I've said that the soft skills are much more important than the hard skills. Most people can be taught almost anything, especially if you give them a turnkey, you give them direction, and you have decent management. But the soft skills, man, the work ethic and the cultural fit, and those types of things, and again, there's a million examples. Things like, for example, people's ability to compartmentalize, work life versus personal life, and not bring drama into the office. I mean, so many different things, right, that make for a good team member. So when we went down the journey of those other practice areas several years ago, the most convenient way to go about it that we thought at the time was to work with a colleague of ours who we had some history with. We actually used to share office space back in the day. And there is something to be said for what I would call buying institutional knowledge, right? Bringing on somebody that has the institutional knowledge, which can definitely be a big challenge when it comes to starting something new, right? I mean, how do you learn except for by doing? And you want to make sure you're doing it responsibly and you're not reckless and you're serving the clients ethically and appropriately. So, this fellow is definitely a seasoned attorney, but he also came along with baggage, and his baggage was not just himself and his MO, but also his team. A couple of people on his team that were not really good people to work with. And so, even putting aside the profit concerns, which I think was also a mistake, I think that if we had had you on board at the time, we would have said, "Hey, Moshe, like, can you run the numbers and tell us whether this is even going to make sense using this model?" Whatever deal we had with him in order to handle the cases, maybe to begin with, it wasn't something that ever could have worked. But I think more than that, I think I learned that we should have cut the strings a lot earlier. I think that, unfortunately, again, we went into it full force. We put all the marketing dollars, we ended up, bringing in a lot of cases, which was, great, seemed to be great. But at the same time, because we didn't have the right people, those people that were not, and they were not our own people. These were individuals, him and his people were people that were not of our own choosing, were not of our own hiring. He had his own uh, preferences of CRM and his own system and his own MO, and so forth. And I think that that was a big part of the mistake. That was a big part of why we ended up, in a situation of in one case, zero profitability, in another case, negative profitability. And it just, and the sequelae of that, by the way, just like any other, bad mistake or misjudgment can go on for months or years. There are still cases that we have that are still have yet to be closed out, even though we ended our relationship with this individual several months ago, right? Most of our hires have been good, but some years ago we had an associate that was not the right fit, not the right hire, and the blow-ups, as we call them, that happened in the wake of those individuals. It was more than one actually, went on for months and months and months. So that's another thing. It's I think, they talk about hire fast, hire slow, fire fast. I think that that could be a whole other discussion, but I do think that very often, and there go the lights. I do think that very often, you know, when you have a signal that something is not right and something is not working out, I think that very often people tend sometimes to hold on to it for longer than they really should. And that goes for not just for a person, but also a practice area, also an MO. I think that one of the things that you shed light on a minute ago yourself was that there is this environment of constant iteration. And even though it's we don't always change things, but are ideating, we're iterating. Sometimes they're micro. There might not be necessarily major things, but getting stuck in old ways and old patterns can lead to ruin. And I'm sure that in many cases, even the big firms, the big falls that happen in our industry, a lot of it is because people are kind of stuck in their ways and kind of or it's like the consistency principle. They've invested so much in this. For them to admit at this point that they were wrong is dissonant, right? And that's why they just continue to go down that rabbit hole. Small example: we wanted to change CRMs at one point, and we hired a consultant, and he concluded that our next new thing should be Salesforce. Okay, so we went down, I think, like a 40 or $50,000 rabbit hole of development, and we backed out. At a certain point, I'm like, okay, I can continue to throw money into this and make it hopefully maybe something that's going to be adequate for us. But once we get that signal that it was not going to be the right fit for whatever reason, I backed out of it. And yes, I burned probably more than 40K because of all the time and energy that we put into it. But is what it is. That's part of better cut your losses, I guess is the short of it in many cases.
I think, and you have the background in psychology, so you could probably speak to the human aspect of this. But I think it's not just holding on to the decision, but it's also just the belief that maybe there's something I didn't try yet that can solve this, right? And we find this with people that need to go. Like in your gut, you're like, I should just fire this person, but then you're like, but I didn't try this, I didn't try this, I didn't try this, and you just
Sure.
try different iterations of trying to solve the problem, and not recognizing that like if the core is not good, you're not going to change who they are, right?
Yes.
And really it just needs to be like the culture fit, like you said, and things like that. So every business owner struggles with that, and it's tough. And then you have to question, like, am I worried about the cost, or am I worried about the person themselves? And the damage of having a bad person there, it's like a cancer. It spreads, and it affects other team members and people who are good and normally good. They start functioning at levels that are not good, because they're interfacing with these people. So it's definitely something that you want to eliminate right away. We're approaching the tail end of our conversation. Is there any part of your journey that we didn't talk about that you think would be helpful or impactful to share with our audience, that they might be able to say, oh yeah, like that. I really have been trying to overcome that, and that's something that I tried to get it all out of you, but maybe there's something in your journey that we missed that you want to share.
Sure. There's another aspect of Founder's Dilemma that is near and dear to my heart. We talked on and off about systemization. We touched on or maybe implied discussions about delegation. But I do think that again, getting a little bit into the psychology weeds here for a moment. Many founders suffer from a challenge of being able to delegate and delegate effectively. And there are a lot of different aspects to this, but I'm just going to touch on one of them, which is the ego that's involved in, this person just can't do it as well as I can do it. And I say, well, first of all, how do you know you're even right about that? Maybe you're wrong about that. But even if it's true, even if it's true, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't delegate it, right? I mean, there's plenty of very capable people, and they might not be the rock star that you are, but they might be close, or they might bring other things to the table and look at things in a slightly different way than you look at them. But we are so sometimes bogged down by the ego of, you know, it's got to be the Adam Rosenblum way. And believe me, in the earlier years of my practice, when I did everything, and I did start like I think almost every lawyer who starts their own business with a solo practice, with my own business. Nobody handed me anything. I started literally from scratch in this regard. I didn't partner up. There was a time when I was literally answering every phone call, sending every email, sending every fax, if you remember what that is, attending every court appearance. And I developed an MO, just like we all do, right? A very specific MO about how I handled things. And of course, I always sought to try to find people that are going to be one. We talk about culture. It's not just like, oh, do we get along with people, but it's also like, okay, do we jibe in terms of like the way we see the world, the way we see business, and things of that nature. So I think that is important. But I think that it's really important for it's not just important, it's essential. There's no way that anybody could ever scale, no matter what. I don't care what, unless you want to forever have a business in one. There's no way that a business will ever scale unless a person gets to the point where they come to realize that I need to be able to delegate certain things. And really, from an efficiency, from an economic standpoint, highest and best, right? And you know what? That might be different for different people. For me, that was finding other attorneys to do the court appearances because I didn't think that was my highest and best. And I didn't, at a certain point, after having done it a few thousand times, I didn't feel like I really needed to do it ever again. I have a colleague that also runs a very successful and large traffic ticket practice, and he goes to, I say, still goes to court. Why? Because he enjoys it. But the difference is, I've told this to people out over the years. Once you've scaled your business, you have a choice. I have a choice that I can decide to be the guy who goes to court. I can decide not to be that. If I decide it's my highest and best, or maybe it's just something that I want to do, then I can do it. But if you're all on your own and you haven't created the systems, the processes, and the people that's going to be necessary to grow beyond yourself, you're never going to have that choice. You're always going to be stuck in that same place that you are. So, and I think honestly, it's as much about the psychology to tie this all the way back to the beginning of our conversation on my life story. I think it's as much about the psychology as anything else. I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of excuses to be had, right? I'm sure you hear these excuses all the time. But the cost, but to this, but to this, but to this. But then you look at every other business that's ever done, and you say, well, why didn't they have the excuse? They could have also said that I could have also had that same excuse too. What about all the costs that are going to be involved in doing this type of thing, right? If you mean for some lawyers, if they just took a look at my expense line, it would be like crazy to them. Even my dad, I think at times I say, Dad, I have like a $3 million expense line and $1 million payroll. It's like he can't wrap his head around it almost because he never had that. He never scaled up his business, and that was maybe intentional and that worked for him at the time. But you have to if it all depends on what you want, but if this is what you want ultimately is to scale, it's an absolutely necessary thing. You have to be ready to delegate however much you can and really preserve, the highest and best or the stuff that you really want to do for yourself and to try to really find the best people to do that. It's one of the great takeaways I took away from the Science of Scalability book is the better people you bring on, the more productive they're going to be and the more it raises the floor. And every business should really continue to raise the floor as much as possible because the sky's the limit on the ceiling, but as far as the floor, unfortunately, like we talked about, if you have the wrong people and so that's the trick. It's doing creating the systems, delegating, but also making sure you have the right people in place. That would be the summary of the learnings of 21 years in business for me at least.
Yeah, I love that you're sharing that because it kind of like if we look at the mindset shifts that a business owner needs, the E-Myth was the first one, right? Like you need to be able to step into the business owner role. And I take it a step further and I talk about moving into the investor role where you're kind of like a stock owner and you're like even getting out of the boots on the ground CEO level level role if that's something that you want. But it also allows you to make decisions in a different way. And I think it helps the people that I work with to see capital investment for what it is, right? But then the next step is moving this is another book and the same author as the Science of Scaling that you referenced a moment ago, Dr. Benjamin Hardy. He wrote it together with Dan Sullivan, but Who Not How. And I think that once you are in the business owner role, the next thing that you have to really, and this is developing a muscle that takes time to develop, is to constantly, every time you have a challenge, ask who's going to do this, not how do I do this? Because every time we're asking how, we're setting ourselves up for going back to the place we don't want to be, which is I'm now the solution. I'm the answer. I'm the solution provider. And if we instead ask who can solve this, who can, even in, the developing of your estate planning business, you sent a team member to a conference to learn information, right? Like you didn't assume we know it all, from the get-go. We're going to go and we're going to do our research, we're going to do our due diligence, we're going to find it out, and we're going to ask from these other people, what it is that they're doing. And then when we need to put somebody in a role, we're going to figure out who that somebody needs to be. It's not going to be, oh, I'm just going to do it because this needs to be done. And when we look at businesses that are able to achieve rapid scaling, rapid success, it's always because they understand that business is built off the leverage of other people's talents and time. And the more that we figure out who is going to be the person that's going to do this, that is the very next step in this process of, going from the e-myth idea to the business owner, and then from the business owner to, really getting good at finding the right person or solution to get this done. And it's not just falling on me. All right, as we wrap up this episode, I'm going to ask you two questions. One is, one parting piece of advice or wisdom that you have for our listeners. Number two, if you want to make it available, if anybody wants to reach out to you, get in touch with you, how would you like them to do that? And maybe there's opportunities for collaboration in some way. But before that, I just want to remind everybody, we talked about at the beginning of the episode, we're doing a 2-day in-person workshop, and this is specifically for solos and smalls that are looking to grow beyond themselves. If you haven't been able to get to $100,000 months and you're trying to get there, the purpose of this 2-day workshop is to help you develop your plan for 2026 so that you know exactly what steps you need to take to make this happen. And we visit every single part of your business. We look at your pricing structure. We look at who what your target market you're targeting. We look at the staff that you have and what you're going to need to make that happen. And we look at if you need to invest in the business and you don't have the capital to do so, how do you solve that? How do you find that solution? So we cover all of that in this 2-day event. Invite you to check it out and come and join me for that. We're keeping it to 20 seats. So you want to make sure that you're in that room. It's going to be a wonderful experience for you. And I firmly believe that even though you might have struggled to get here for whatever amount of time, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we can help you get there in 12 months. You go to profitwithlaw.com/LFG 2026, profitwithlaw.com/LFG, which stands for Law Firm Growth 2026, and check it out. And there are discounts right now on the tickets. Those discounts expire. My team is continuing to raise the price every few days, so you want to make sure you take advantage of that now. Adam, back to you.
Thank you, Moshe. I think my parting advice, if you allow me to be blunt, is because I don't want to just rehash everything that I said. I think that every business owner has to have at least one, but sometimes many conversations with themselves to determine what it is that they want and who it is that they want to be. Um, there are a lot of people floating around out there that, in my mind, have no business being a business owner. They would be much better suited to take a job and just get whatever it is that they can get and try to make, do with whatever it is that they're being paid. Some people end up in this position, by default, for lack of options. Certainly in my case, from square one, that was the case, right? I had hoped to be getting this job that I didn't end up getting, and that's how I ended up in that position. But it wasn't an active choice because I could have, like any new attorney, I could have interviewed with a firm or whatnot. And sometimes, we need to fail a few times until we get that wake up call, which is maybe this isn't suitable for me. I think there are very few in betweens. I think we're getting more and more to that place. And certainly, if private equity continues to expand and march into the practice in the way that they want to, there are really going to be no in-betweens. There are going to be employees, and then there are going to be people who are building and scaling big law firms that ultimately will probably be bought up by private equity. And so I think it's to thine own self be true. Every person has to have that conversation with himself, I think, and realize what it is that they want and what their capabilities are. If you're the type of person that really would rather not be dealing with things like growth and scaling and marketing and HR and investing and all these other things that are elements of what's necessary to be an entrepreneur, well, maybe that's a sign that you probably shouldn't be doing it. Sorry to say. On the other hand, if you're somebody like myself, I far enjoy these aspects of the practice of law compared to the actual practice of law itself. That's just the way it is. That's the way that I'm wired. I discovered that about myself some years ago. I was like, you know what? I love this stuff. I love the business aspects. I love talking about business. I like meeting business owners. I could talk about it for hours at a time without getting tired. Talking about the academic aspects of the practice of law, not so much. So I think that that really is a differentiator, in my opinion, and I think that it does hold back a lot of people, not just from scaling, but I think in the other direction, from finally realizing that maybe it's just not something that they're suited for, and maybe they should, take a job. There's no shame in that. If you're the type of person that just wants to be a lawyer, you can do that. There are plenty of firms. I mean, we know from our own hiring journey that they say national unemployment of lawyers is only 1%, maybe even less, which means that despite the fact that there are a lot of lawyers, surprisingly, there are also lots and lots and lots of legal jobs that are out there. So I think that that's an important moment, and it should be for each person, entrepreneur, would-be entrepreneur. I'm definitely open to connecting with anybody on LinkedIn. Adam H. Rosenblum, H. Henry Rosenblum on LinkedIn. My email address is adam@rosenblumlaw.com. So those are the best ways to connect with me. And I do have a passion for mentoring business owners, and in particular, law firm owners. I do it as a hobby, as a volunteer. And yes, I do make them read the E-Myth even before our very first meeting. So just be aware that that's required reading, for anybody that I talk to. But yeah, it's more than happy to entertain any questions as well at any point in time. And thank you, Moshe, for hosting me on your podcast. It's an honor and a privilege.
Awesome. I appreciate you being here, Adam, and for sharing openly about your journey. I think there's no better way for people to learn what they can do, what they can improve, the steps that they can take from just hearing other people's stories of how they did it and the challenges they had, the challenges they had to overcome, lessons learned, and all of that. So we unpacked a ton in this conversation. This is a great episode. Really appreciate you spending your time with us so that we can unpack it and have that conversation with our audience. Folks, we're here every single Thursday with a brand new episode. So if you're not subscribed yet to the show, what are you waiting for? You want to know when the next one drops because we have awesome stuff just like this conversation with Adam. So make sure you hit the subscribe button in your podcast player or on the YouTube channel where you're watching this. And this way you'll get notified when we release a new episode. And we'll catch you next week. Take care. Bye for now.